Thank you for joining today's webinar, Data is King, hosted by Unilog and SDI. All participants have been placed on mute. If you have questions, please use the chat function. We'll address questions at the end of the presentation. SDI is North America's leading supply chain management company focused on maintenance, repair, and operations, and the indirect materials and services supply chain. Committed to providing sustainable value to their clients with investments in their SDI Exchange system, the software and technology platform designed expressly for MRO that drives their end-to-end solutions, SDI has bolstered its master data management and implementation processes by adding a workflow connected to both SDI field personnel and clients, as well as interconnecting their SDI implementer with Unilog's SIM2 product, Information Enrichment System, and SDI Exchange. SDI selected Unilog as their data partner because of the depth and breadth of experience in data management, particularly in the MRO industry. Unilog is a global technology and services company that specializes in e-commerce solutions and enriched product catalogs for the B2B marketplace. The enhancements provide a seamless workflow from collection through publication into each client's personal SDI Exchange catalog, improving interoperability of product data, product content, and search functionality. Today's speakers are Suchit Bachalli, Chief Executive Officer at Unilog, and Missy Decker, Vice President of Solution Design at SDI. A 2015 Philadelphia 40 Under 40 honoree, Suchit Bachalli is CEO at Unilog Content Solutions, a global technology and products company. Suchit has successfully built an ecosystem of customers and partners who stand testimony to Unilog's product strength. Today, Unilog's 800 employees and over 400 customers reflect the Unilog ethos that has been carefully nurtured over the past 15 years. Missy Decker started her career at SDI over 30 years ago, working side by side with the founders of MRO Integrated Supply Chain Management. Missy leads the solution design process beyond traditional expectations, driving continuous improvement. Missy's experience means she knows the right questions to ask, so SDI can build the right solution the first time, every time. Now, to start our webinar, I'll pass it off to Suchit Bachalli. Suchit?
Right, documents, PDF files, all of the installation guides, rich descriptions, SEO friendly, etc. The convergence of the two really is what makes data king, and understanding that for every B2B marketplace, whether it's from a procurement function or whether it's from a online omni-channel sales perspective, on both ends of the spectrum, we need to have clean, consistent, and robust product information. Because remember, even in procurement systems, the data that you push out is being consumed by people who are making buying decisions or are searching for products in platforms such as SDI Exchange or others. And therefore, it is important that we provide that information to them. Next slide. There's a lot of research around it. So there is a lot of research that Forrester has put together, Gartner has put together, but some of the key aspects that you need to sort of recognize is that B2B buyers tend to perform a lot more online research before making a purchase, right? So we do that in our personal lives, but it's a misnomer to think that that doesn't happen in B2B. So overwhelmingly, a lot of B2B research happens prior to the purchasing decision. And 94% of buyers would say that they would return to a company website just because the content is valuable. I mean, in terms of building loyalty, building the ability to service your customers, having good content is absolutely important. 85% of B2B marketers would say that content creation was the biggest contributing success factor over the last 12 months. And therefore, when you look at the role that data and content plays in your business, it really becomes very important to understand that in this digital age, data is the product. When you look at a product and whatever that product might be, from a drill bit to a power tool to a leather driver glove, the product is represented in the form of online digital data. And having that product information is extremely important and critical. Next slide. So what happens if you don't do it, right? What are the costs of not doing it? And we often get asked this question as a company when we're presenting it to customers. They say, well, this is all very good. I'm okay now. And yes, I have some orders that are incorrect. And yes, it is a little inefficient. But you know what? I'm not so sure that it makes sense for me to make this investment. And we often tell them, what is the cost of not making the investment? The single biggest cost is poor customer experience. The ability for your customers to buy through either procurement systems such as SDI Exchange, or through partners such as SDI, or through other procurement systems, whether it's Ariba or Vinimaya or any other punch-out catalog system, the ability for them to know what you're selling, have the right units of measure, have the right description, have the right image, in the right color, is extremely important, and it lends to a better customer experience, and it builds loyalty. So it's the same reason that we go to certain sites in our personal lives. We go to certain sites for purchasing more than others, just because it's laid out well and it allows for better use of content. So that's the single largest result of having bad content. But then there's a lot of efficiencies that are lost through the inconsistent information that you might be putting out there. So if you have data that is not normalized, then there is a higher chance of getting increased returns. So for example, if you're buying products from 4 different vendors, one of them has a different unit of measure than the other, and then you might end up buying things or buying products that may not necessarily fit the right application, and therefore it becomes important to understand that it's very desirable to have really good content and consistent information, right? So consistency and normalization is extremely important. Next slide. The benefits of good content are in my admittedly biased opinion, are way too many to list on one slide. However, let's look at platforms like SDI Exchange, where you're able to search for products, and the search results are, no matter how good a search engine it is, the search results are to some extent dependent on the product data itself. So the underlying product data, if you just have a UPC number and maybe no product information, it doesn't allow customers or procurement executives to be able to perform certain basic search search requirements. So it's very important that the way we search has been so largely defined by Google and our search experiences outside of work, that it's imperative that we offer the best search results possible to our customers, whether it's on a website, whether it's on a procurement platform, or whether it's in a closed loop punch-out catalog. There is also the notion that the good content that you create is not just for external users or people outside your company. Internally, we have found that internally having good content and a clean catalog is the single largest soft asset that customer service reps can use, salespeople can use, managers, project managers can use, analysts can use. So data, having data considering that as an asset within your organization and investing in it is very important, because it's not just for people outside, it's also very useful for people on the inside. And obviously a better customer service leads to higher loyalty, and therefore it generates a much higher return on investment. So our customers, we talk to them a lot in terms of, how much, and we've been doing this for 18 years. We ask them a lot in terms of, what is the impact that a project like that they would do with Unilog would have. And typically, the biggest number that we see, the biggest impact that we see is the 40% growth in usability and customer satisfaction. I mean, we've had so many customers that have done Net Promoter Scores pre-content development and post-content development. It has a huge impact in customer satisfaction. It also has a very tangible impact in the cost savings per SKU if you're on the sell side, and cost savings per order if you're on the procurement side. So it really and that $4 to $6 cost saving per SKU on the sell side is oftentimes dwarfed by the cost savings on the procurement side, because if you place an order that the vendor then comes back and says, I don't have these items, or what do you mean by these? It's the time and money that's spent back and forth that can be avoided with really good product data and content. Next slide.
So thank you, Suchit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the internal data that's used within a company. And here we're showing a study done by Harvard Business Review of 75 executives, and those executives, out of them, only 3% found that they have what they considered acceptable data. Only 3%. And they also found that bad data costs 10 times as much to do the work with. So what they're really saying there is that the effort taken behind working with bad data, either because of rework or taking too long to transact the data, is a real waste within an organization. When we talk about internal data, if you look at data as a tree with roots and branches and the leaves are money, because data is information. And when you have information, you're able to do things with that information that can help your organization. Within a company, when we're talking about maintenance, repair, and operating data, there's two real reasons that you want really good data. One is to be able to find it, because if you can't find it, you're going to buy it again. And the second is to be able to buy it, and to buy it correctly, and to be able to leverage that spend. So when you have good data, you're able to transact and do this efficiently. We're going to take a look at some of the root causes of why companies have bad data, the other 97% of those companies that were looked at by Harvard Business Review. And typically it revolves around four key factors. There's a lack of investment. As Suchit said, data is a soft asset, and it's something that really needs to be invested in. And oftentimes companies struggle with investing in data, and we'll talk a little bit about why they do that a little bit down the road here. But when there's no investment, there's no taxonomy. And taxonomy is really just the formatting of the data. The order in which the words appear, so that they're easy to find, they're consistent, and the attributes are included in the descriptions. There's no governance, meaning there's no controls over the data being inputted. Lots of different people have the ability to add data, and everybody calls the widget something different. So there's no taxonomy and there's no governance about how parts are added. And then the last key reason is that oftentimes enterprise organizations have multiple systems, or even a single organization can have multiple systems. You can have your CMMS system, you can have your financial system, you can have a procurement system, and those systems don't necessarily connect when it comes to the data and the taxonomy and the descriptions. So when you don't make that investment and you don't have the taxonomy, here's what you end up having as some of your root problems. You have incomplete descriptions, or bad descriptions, or wrong descriptions. And the description is really how you're going to be able to find that part. It's what you send to your suppliers on what you want to buy. So the more accurate your description, the more likely you are to get the item that you really want the first time. Inaccurate unit of measure. And unit of measure is probably the three worst words in the MRO language. It can bring grown men and women to their knees. It's one of those things that causes us all pain and suffering because of the varying units of measure. So you want consistent units of measure, and you want the proper unit of measure in your data. Data is more than just descriptions when we're talking about internal data. especially when we're talking about maintenance, repair, and operating supplies. A wrong bin location is going to stop you from being able to find the data when you need it. Suboptimal order quantities, meaning that the quantities that you're going to order are not the right quantities because the data in your system is not accurate. There's all kinds of inaccurate lead times or wrong tax codes, and especially no manufacturer information. The manufacturer information is what really can tie your parts together in terms of leveraging the spend or in terms of identifying duplicates, or even fit, form, and function, so you have alternates that you can use. So when these are your root problems, these are some of the things that are likely to happen. You're going to have poor search capabilities. So now you've got the part, you know it's there somewhere, you can't find it, you need it, so what do? You buy it again. And now it's a rush order. And with rush order comes expedited freight. So there goes some money down on the ground there. It's lost. You have every intention of making it better the next time, but for this time, you got to run out and get that part. You'll fix it later. And so you have unnecessary purchases. When you've got these unnecessary purchases, you run into varying prices in your system because now you've got this part and you ordered it from the correct source and you've ordered it from an incorrect source, and you've got prices that are all over the board. You've got substitutions because you need this part and it's not from the right source. So there's a substitution involved, and there's no note as to whether it's acceptable or not. You just get it and you use it. And now you've got increased processing costs. So all this is more money that's on the floor. You're going to have to buy it again to replenish your stock, and you've lost some opportunities there to leverage your spend. You've got your increased handling costs. You're going to run out and go get it. That's people that are on the road, or you're flying it in from somewhere. And when you're doing that and it's sitting in inventory, now your inventory is not being utilized. So you bought the part, it's in stock, you can't find it, you spent all that time, and you still have the inventory on the shelf. So what happens then? You start buying more, and you've got bloated inventories, and you've got excess inventory. You had inventory planned for what you thought you were going to need, but you had to buy it outside the system or outside the process. And so now that inventory that's on the shelf is going to sit there longer than anticipated. Then something happens and that part becomes obsolete, and now you've got a growing obsolescence, which is part of the poor working capital. Anybody in manufacturing who has a storeroom knows that there's pressure on working capital to reduce inventories, to optimize the inventories, to not grow obsolescence. And then when all this occurs, you've got production inefficiencies. You've been down this time that you're waiting for the part, or you don't have the right part to keep the machine running up as long as it should be. You kind of had to do a fix. So these are the problems that happen. And as you can see by the diagram, all the money's on the floor. You're left sweeping up, trying to figure out how to collect all this money and meet the goals that you had. And it's almost impossible because you don't have the good data. When you've got varying prices or you've got categories that aren't consistent, it's very, very difficult to leverage the spend. And that's one of the key problems that procurement people have when it comes to really trying to do what's in the best interest of their company, is they've got to start with the data, and it's a daunting task. When we look at industry standards, the Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, as well as the Institute for Supply Management, have done a lot of studies on bad data. And these are just some of the statistics that they came up with. 30% of the inventory in a storeroom will never be used. That's that obsolete inventory. It might be in good condition, but for whatever reason, either the equipment's been moved out of your facility or nobody knew it was there and now there's a new product replacement. 30% will never be used. 62% of your stock material have incorrect or wrong order points. And again, this can go back to you bought it outside of the system. So you think you need 3 and 6, and really you need either a lot more or a lot less of those. So your order points are wrong. The lead times are inaccurate. This is all part of the data realm. Data in terms of not just the description again, but pieces of information tied to a part. The lead times are inaccurate. And 87% of the order quantities for stock material are incorrect. So you total up the incorrect order quantities with the inaccurate lead times and the wrong order points, And it's a wonder that, sometimes you wonder how you keep your plant up and running. When all this happens, and you've got people looking for parts, the Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals found that 25 to 30% of maintenance time is spent just looking for parts, walking around looking. And then 50% of your work orders at any given point in time are on hold waiting for parts. Those are pretty staggering numbers when it comes to lost opportunities. So what are the steps to transforming your data? The first thing that you want to do is to try to analyze your data to find out what good information you do have. And we're typically looking for manufacturer and manufacturer part number, unit of measure, and description. Those are the basics that you start with. Once you get those, you kind of line them up with the existing fields and attributes that are available for that noun, so to speak. So this is the normalization part. You take your existing data and you put it into the proper fields for manufacturer, unit of measure, and then you begin to lay out the attributes. And you're going to have a lot of missing data. There's going to be parts that aren't available to you based on your existing information that you have. A lot of companies will rely on the supplier data. And the supplier data is better than nothing, but it's not going to give you the full description as the manufacturer would describe it. And that's why we stress that you need manufacturer and manufacturer information, not only for the description of the part itself, but also to be able to categorize and to be able to leverage your spend. So once the part is normalized, see here it's normalized, and we've got a bearing and we've got Gatorade, two very different types of materials that you could find in any storeroom. The part is then set up based on the specific attributes for that noun modifier pair, for that noun. So you can see that the attributes for a bearing are much different than the attributes for Gatorade. So if you look at the Gatorade side, you'll see there's color and form and flavor. Obviously, those aren't attributes that you would use for a bearing. So you line them up to the key attributes, and once again, you lay in the material or the information that you have from your existing data. And all the red lines there are all the data that's still missing. And that information comes from the manufacturer data. And you fill that in so that you have a complete description with as much information as possible. And when you do this and you use the attributes, part of the taxonomy is that you have to decide how are we going to abbreviate ounce. In the Gatorade, you can see that there's a 21-ounce container size. Is ounce going to be OZ, or is it going to be spelled out as ounce? Is each going to be EA, or is it spelled out? And the same with inch and every other metric that there is. That's how you normalize, and that's how you gain consistency with your data. So now you have enriched data, complete enriched data that's attributed and normalized. And from that is when you really get your catalog. And I don't necessarily mean an external catalog, for customers to come to, but even your own internal catalog. It can be as robust as you want it to be. Here you see the short description that's often the standard in ERP systems, but then you also have the complete description. And you'll see in the Gatorade description in particular, there's probably more attributes there than anybody would ever need to look at. But it's there if anybody does want to look at it, as well as any kinds of pictures or safety material data sheets or spec sheets that can be attached to the information also. So you want to transform your data starting with the basic information and normalizing that until you can acquire more information. And the process can be by category. It can be, of course, the big bang, where you try to do it all at once, or you hire somebody to do it for you. And then the result that you get, we're going to take that same data tree and we're going to look at it now and find out what you've got when you make an investment in master data management. You'll have that consistent taxonomy. You will have complete descriptions. You'll have accurate units of measure, and you have to think about the unit of measure and what piece of information you're looking at, whether it's going to be the unit of issue, or whether it's going to be the unit of purchase, or whether you need any kind of a bridge there between the two. You have your correct bin locations, the optimal order quantity. You're going to do the elimination of duplicates. As you go through this process and you look at the attributes, you may find that many of your part numbers are exactly the same. They have the same exact fit, form, and function. And that's nothing really wrong with that. It's just that the more SKUs you have, or stock keeping units, the more cost there is to maintaining them. It also kind of limits your ability to leverage a single part number. So if you've got 3 different stocking numbers and they're all the same thing, and you're either buying them from the same supplier or even from different suppliers, the usage then is spread out among those 3 units rather than consolidating them and saying, hey, we really buy more of this than we think we do. We should be able to leverage that spend. So now you've got the foundation and the roots for a good tree, if you will. You're able to search parts so you can find them easily when you want them. You don't have to go out and buy them again. When that happens, and when you've got good data, you can really work with suppliers to get just-in-time deliveries because you know exactly what you need. You've got good lead times, you've got good usage information, and you can begin to leverage your spend and save money in that way. You're going to have reduced freight costs and strategic purchases. Your purchasing group is going to be able to start to leverage their spend and make some strategic decisions on the supply base that you're using. You'll gain consistent prices, and one of the key factors for procurement groups everywhere is compliance to the deals. You'll be able to gain compliance because the information is going to be accurate and you'll be able to trace it and track it. The other thing that's going to happen here is that because parts can be found, is that the users are going to be able to and begin to trust the system again. And instead of buying parts or taking more parts that they need and squirreling them away somewhere, they will trust that the data is accurate and they'll be able to get the parts when they want them. So you can see all these other things that you will gain, especially when it comes to inventory optimization and utilization. That is probably the single largest sinkhole of money that we kind of run into in manufacturing is the amount of inventory that is required or is considered to be required. And a lot of that has to do with safety stock, either because of inaccurate lead times or because the supply chain takes too long. But once you get your data, and you can, again, remember, the whole purpose of data is to provide information. That could be reporting, it could be, in usage, it could be in a lot of ways that's going to leverage your organization. But the key is that you now can provide the correct parts in the correct time in order to maintain your equipment and to improve your production efficiencies. So now you've got a tree full of opportunities. You're able to leverage your spend, you're able to standardize SKUs and consolidate. And this gives you the opportunity to really help reduce the total cost of your MRO for your company.
So the need for a product information management system is really more to do with the ability to keep your content clean and keep it up to date. So what Missy and I just spoke about really is one half of the battle, right? The other half of the battle is, now that we've done everything, how do we keep it clean? How do we keep it in a position where we don't have to keep doing this every 2 or 3 years? So one of the things that the product information management, typical, software products will do is essentially create the taxonomy, the data model, and then build rules that will allow you to keep data clean going forward, right? So if you go to the next slide. Right, so there are 2 types of content, right? The manufacturer content is fairly basic, it's technical. The human-centric content is content which your customers really want. It has in-product images, in-use product images, instructional videos, manuals, user guides, etc. It not just addresses the immediate need for content, but it also serves as a continuous sort of portal for people to come and consume content as they like. So it's really important to have that over a period of time and build that and then maintain it going forward. So when you look at content solutions, what it really looks like is on the next slide, the sort of the before and the after. Is to take content, and maybe it's a little hard to see, but it's a air conditioning unit, and you will see that on the left hand side is just basic product information with the part number, UPC, etc. But on the right is all of the rich content that's required. Now, it may not be required for procuring that product at that particular moment, and I get that sometimes you may say, well, that's very good, but I know my product and I don't really need all of that content right now. But what happens is that the consumption of content occurs over the life cycle of the product, right? So it's not just at the point of purchase that the content is consumed. The content can be consumed for that particular product over the life cycle of the product itself. And therefore, when you look at this from the perspective that I'm coming back to this site 6 months in or a year in, and I have some other information that I really need about the product, for example, I lost the remote, or I want to replace batteries or whatever, how do I, what do I do? And, create a repository of content that allows people to keep coming back to it, and that's very important in order to be able to do. So let's dig in a little deeper into this particular example. And if you go to the next slide, what you will see is that there are about 6 parts of that SKU that we have built out, right? Classification or categorization to that particular taxonomy, normalizing the core data, optimizing the product name, many product images, obviously, in the videos, and competitive pricing. Now, some of the things that we have done also include competitive pricing by vendor, so that, and this was in partnership with SDI, is to just be able to identify across vendors. When you want to normalize your supply chain and you say, I have 10 different vendors supplying pretty much the same product, I want to be able to consolidate that. And so, from a buy side, you want to be able to have competitive pricing available as part of your data cleanliness efforts, right? So that's very important. On the next slide, you'll see some manufacturer overview, feature benefit bullets, standards and approvals, etc. And this is more on and this I will grant you is more on the sell side. So if you some of you on the call may have maybe from manufacturing that are the creators of this content and want to push this out into the channel, distributors or customers that consume it. And I think it's important to notice how that data can be used both ways, right? The same data that you're pushing onto the sales channel can also be used when you're selling products post-sale, as well as from a procurement perspective. On the next slide, you'll see all of the what I call the third layer of data, which is essentially all of the specifications, attributes, etc. But now we're also adding to that digital assets and cross-sells and upsells and related products, etc. So even in a procurement system, having the supersede part numbers, having all of the cross-referencing done is very important, so that because it plays a big role in managing your product data. So going back to that whole product information management piece of it, the next slide, it really shows you everything that we've talked about really covers a third of the life cycle of a product, right? And that ongoing governance part of it, that's really the most challenging piece of the puzzle, right? How do you set expectations in terms of how do you establish the workflow processes, for example, to keep your content clean? What are the permissible values for manufacturer names and UPC codes and brand names, etc.? What are the valid value lists for attribute data? So, as Missy alluded, for units of measure, how are you going to, call out ounce or inch or each? And once that data governance model has been set up, without a PIM, it's very nearly impossible to really keep that clean. If you're trying to
Thank you, Suchit. When we talk about internal data in an organization, and the governance that's required there, again, it's limiting the number of people that can actually add parts. And we're talking about, in the world of MRO, adding parts or changing parts in terms of the data that's in the description or that's in your system. So creating a small team to govern that process, and then limiting the number of people that have access, but then also making sure that you develop an electronic template and an automated workflow so that the process is not so cumbersome that people want to go around the system. That's probably one of the number one things that I see in manufacturing organizations where there is a data governance process, is that it takes so long from the time somebody tries to add a part until it's actionable that they go buy the part outside the system in the meantime. And they never really know where their part stands as far as being added. So identifying the critical elements that are required for a new part addition, you can ask for more, but make sure that there's a clear understanding of what the critical parts are required, or the part can't move any further. And then that automated workflow, so as soon as one part's finished, it goes to the next person in that process. And having some kind of push reporting that goes out to the users that says, here's where we are on adding these parts, so they have some idea of what the process is. And the key to the success of this is establishing at the onset how long it's going to take for a part to become actionable, and then sticking to those timelines. So it's really, again, putting that process in place, training on the process, and then sticking to the process and the commitments on the timelines, and making sure that the parts get added in a timely manner. And that is the summary for data transformation.
We do, thank you, Missy and Suchit. We do have a couple questions here. The first one looks like for Missy. Do you also capture true manufacturer and manufacturer part numbers for OEM parts, in which in reality are commercially available?
Yes, I think we would always recommend capturing the original equipment manufacturer. You know, most databases will have opportunities to put in a primary manufacturer and a secondary manufacturer, just as they do a primary and secondary vendor. So just make sure that you put it in the right spot so that the information goes out correctly. But having that information, you know, sometimes your maintenance guys may look up in the manual and that's the only number that they have. So having that information is valuable.
Another one related to original equipment manufacturers. Missy, what is the supply base, distributors and OEM, doing about their data problem?
Well, I think that's a challenge, particularly in MRO, because there are so many part numbers, so many manufacturers, and so many suppliers. Is that there are no real standards, just like there's no barcoding system or that encompasses the whole thing. So I think individual distributors, as Suchit was saying, many of them have their own catalogs and they cleanse the data one way. Another distributor may cleanse their data another way. That's what makes it challenging for companies that say, okay, we're going to cleanse our data, and that's what happens when you go to the distributors. So to my knowledge, there is no major plan to standardize or to organize. I think it's something that SDI has always strived for in terms of, kind of, if you will, educating the market on the importance of it and coming to some kind of standards.
Suchit, we hear a lot about industrial Internet of Things and big data. How do you see this impacting manufacturing companies and their approach to data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I look at the IoT aspects of what's happening, especially with the big push that GE is making in what's called Industry 4.0, content's going to play an increasing role. The way in which content is consumed obviously will change, right? In the sense that today, for example, we are seeing use cases where companies are using low energy Bluetooth beacons that they install on bins, and what the beacon does is it just radiates or pushes out a single URL, and that URL has all of the information of all of the contents in that bin. And it's just not a bin, it could be a storeroom, it could be a control room, it could be a trailer on site, on location. So when you convert all of the content, so imagine all of the content that Missy and I showed you are now condensed onto a URL, and that URL is being broadcasted by a low energy Bluetooth beacon. It doesn't really need to be connected to the internet, right? So there is this this incorrect perception that Internet of Things means everything has to be interconnected. It's not really true. So with low energy Bluetooth beacons, what we're seeing happen is that it's got a battery, it's broadcasting this URL, and that URL you can tap on that URL using an app, and the only thing is that now once you have the app and you go to that URL, you can see everything that's in that bin or in that room and then reorder. So one of the things that we're seeing happen is that the function of procurement is going to drastically change over the next 10 years. And I think it's going to be more machine driven and more data driven, in which case it would behoove all the organizations to convert all of the product data and processes into digital content so that it is machine friendly. And I think that's a long-term view, but I think some progressive companies have already gone down that path.
The next question may be for both of you. Who typically owns the data or is responsible for investing in improved data?
I don't really have a good solid answer for that. I think it varies on the organizations and in some regards the resources that they have available. A lot of times it could be somebody in procurement, sometimes it's IT, and sometimes it's even reliability. But in my mind, in the world of MRO, it needs to be somebody that has the understanding of the parts so that they can make sure that the right information is being provided. So that's typically somebody in the maintenance or the reliability world.
And if the question was around the legal ownership of the product or the content, product content is typically produced by the manufacturer, right? So the eventual ownership of the content rests with the manufacturer of that said product, because they created the product and they created all of the initial content that goes with it. Now, there are two things that happen to that content. One is you get derivative works of that content as people tend to improve that product data in order to suit the requirements. You can only create derivative products, or you can only create derivative data and improve that product content if you have a relationship with the manufacturer or if you're a reseller. So typically, if you're a customer of theirs, you're a buyer of theirs, you use that product content and then you're reselling them, or using the content in some way, shape, or form and have a direct relationship or partnership with the manufacturers, it is quite all right to create those derivative works of product, and that typically belongs to the distributor or the consumer. Recently, there was a landmark judgment, and I just say this because I watch the space closely. It's part of our core business. There's a landmark judgment in the Supreme Court, which was, I forget the plaintiff. I know the plaintiff was LinkedIn. I forget the defendant, but the defendant in the case was taking LinkedIn profiles and then creating algorithms to rank them and providing a service on the basis of scraped LinkedIn profiles. And the Supreme Court ruled that any publicly available information is by definition publicly available, and that people are free to use it however they like. If there is anything confidential or product data or content that you do not wish people to see, then you should not put it on your website or have it in your printed catalog. So anything that is publicly available is pretty above par to use that content however you like. When you normalize content, so let's say the manufacturer calls it let's say there's one product type and there are 4 manufacturers, and they call it crimson red, blood red, and it's call it something else. Let's say those are the three different types they call red. Now, typically companies will normalize that and will create the normalization for the filter attributes to say, hey, when I check the box red, I want to be able to see all of these products. I don't care whether it's magenta or whether it's red or whether it's blood red or whether it's crimson. And that's fine as long as it remains on the filter attribute. It should, at the product page detail level, at the product level, it should always mention the actual accurate word that the manufacturer put out, because that's their marketing content. That's how they want to differentiate themselves from their competition. Hey, mine is crimson, the competitor is red, mine's better, and you have to respect that. And so at the product detail level itself, you typically shy away from normalizing certain manufacturer marketing attributes. But on the other hand, you can always normalize what we would call the filter attributes and say, when I pair them up, I'm going to group all of these different values under one group called red. And if someone wants red, they're going to find all of the results. When it comes to technical specifications around units of measure, normalization of units of measure is not intellectual property that you're creating. You're basically transferring or you're converting OUNCE into OZ, and that is just an ASME engineering standard of abbreviation that has no bearing on ownership or on the quality or the intellectual property of the product content. So normalization you can do to any product or SKU.
That sounds great. Thanks, Suchit. It looks like that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our host, Suchit Bachalli, CEO from Unilog, and Missy Decker, Senior Vice President of Solution Design at SDI. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@sdi.com. Thank you for attending.